So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alicia Todd, and I'm the Director General for ParlAmericas, the International Secretariat in Ottawa. And it is such a pleasure to welcome all of you speakers, presidents, parliamentarians, clerks, parliamentary staff to this online meeting on virtual parliamentary sittings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're so delighted that we're actually have the possibility, because we've talked a long time about needing for more collaboration between ParlAmericas and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. So there it took the pandemic to get us here together. We were delighted to be collaborating with the CPA for this particular session. And it's the first of many to come, I'm sure. Not, of many collaborations, not necessarily that we have to all do them virtually. I look forward to working with CPA in person at some point as well. So ParlAmericas, as the institution that promotes parliamentary diplomacy in the Americas and the Caribbean, we're pleased to be collaborating with the CPA to host this meeting, and we're going to learn from the experiences of the Parliament of the Isle of Man, the Senate of Brazil, and the Parliament of the United Kingdom, in addition to all of our participants when we get into the more interactive part of the session. We are currently living in unprecedented crisis, where Parliament's roles of representation, legislation, and oversight are more important than ever, as governments need to respond quickly and effectively to curb this public health crisis and support citizens who are suffering due to its socioeconomic impacts. ParlAmericas has developed several resources to support its member parliaments during this crisis. These include a COVID-19 in Parliament's role during a pandemic publication, which was released in March as an initial briefing document for parliaments. The challenge of adapting and strengthening the role of parliaments in COVID-19, which was released in April and looks at how parliaments across the region have been adapting and continuing their efforts to promote parliamentary openness. And today, with this session, we are launching an infographic on organizing virtual parliamentary sittings. And this is based on experiences from parliaments from this region, including Chile, Ecuador, and Brazil. And all of these resources can be found on our website, but you'll also see the links available to you in the chat function of this Zoom meeting. So those, they're being posted there. We strongly believe that working together and collaborating across borders and institutions is the only way to overcome such challenges. And we hope that this space for dialogue and collaboration will be useful to your work, and we will continue to do our best to support parliaments in the Americas and the Caribbean as you continue to navigate this crisis. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Senator Renard Henfield of the Bahamas, who is the Vice President of ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network for the Caribbean, and he will be our chair for this meeting. And then before I pass the microphone to him, though, I would like to invite Jarvis Mattia, Acting Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, to provide opening remarks. So Jarvis, I pass the microphone to you.
Thank you, Alicia. It's a great pleasure to meet you and colleagues at the ParlAmericas. I think we in the CPA Secretariat take great pleasure in this collaboration. Before I go on with my brief remarks, may I recognize Honorable Speaker Brigitte Anisette, who is a member of the Executive Committee of the CPA, and also Honorable Bruce McKever, who is the Vice Chair of Small Branches of the CPA. It's a great pleasure to interact with our members of the Executive Committee today, and this symbolizes how important this discussion is. May I also recognize all honorable members of Parliament who are attending this event But also, of course, recognize Honorable Senator Enfield of the Bahamas, who is chairing the proceedings today. I also see a number of my own colleagues attending this conversation, as well as some friends and colleagues, but also more importantly, resource persons who have agreed to share with us their experiences in terms of the situation which everyone is facing now. Now, I'll talk briefly about what the CPA has been doing in terms of responding to COVID-19 global pandemic. You will have noted that the situation has been, changing constantly, and within the Secretariat, we have been monitoring this situation beginning from January. And in March, we decided that in terms of the safety and well-being of our staff, we made a decision in consultation with our coordinating committee to send staff to work from home beginning from 16th of March 2020, which was a week before I think the general lockdown was imposed by the government here in the UK. But we also issued a statement to all branches to a statement of support, a statement of solidarity, but also to stress that while we are in this situation, the CPA Secretariat was very much in touch, and we'll be looking at aspects of our work which we can, deliver remotely, and also hearing from our branches and members as to what else we can do to support them at this time. The second thing we also did was to sort of look at all the programs and activities that we had set up, and given the situation, we had to put in place measures either to make sure that those programs were postponed, or an alternative way of delivering those programs were considered. So a number of activities were postponed, including the meeting of the executive committee, which was supposed to take place in India, was going to finish this week. We continue to review the situation, and we're making necessary adjustments on a case-by-case basis in terms of the activities that we are doing. But what is important and what is the fact that the issue of the adaptation has been central on our activities that we are delivering, trying to see if some of those activities can be delivered remotely. A more important element of the activities we have been doing is the drafting of a CPA toolkit for Commonwealth parliaments and legislatures on the COVID-19. And this was launched last month, and it was based on the research that we had conducted amongst our membership to look at what measures we can recommend to parliaments to adopt as they grapple with this pandemic, and the pandemic which has disrupted, business of parliaments within the Commonwealth. The toolkit provides an overview of what the current global pandemic is, the basic protective measures that have been determined, but also looks at ways in which legislatures can remain operational and continuing to uphold democratic responsibilities and duties that are imposed on these institutions by their constitutions. So assessment of different type of emergency legislation currently being enacted was considered, but also some of the practical challenges and recommendations of dealing with those challenges were also discussed in the toolkit. The toolkit has been circulated in our branches, but also other institutions such as the Commonwealth Magistrate and Judges Associations have taken on board some of those recommendations and have started conversations within their membership to look at how they can continue to adjust in this situation. The feedback so far we've been receiving from our members and from others is that perhaps there are some good recommendation in there. that they can use and adapt or interpret in terms of dealing with this situation in their respective parliaments. The University of McGill in Canada have looked at the toolkit and have been able to share the toolkit with their networks because they see value and importance recommendations. Now, in terms of looking forward, and I'll be finishing very shortly, there are a couple of things that we are thinking in the CPA. We hope that as a result of this work, maybe a lot of discussion will be had on the issue of business continuity for parliaments in general, looking to the future in terms of the new normal and what challenges may appear in the future, and how do we ensure that at all times the business of parliaments it continues in the wake of pandemics like this one. The second aspect is the CPA has the benchmarks for democratic legislatures. These are benchmarks that parliaments use to review and assess their performance. We hope that the benchmarks will be reviewed to incorporate some of the aspects of the toolkit, given that the new normal that the world is going to face is pretty much what we are doing now, using electronic methods more in terms of transacting business, but also looking at capacities, particularly of our small branches, in terms of the challenges that they face in adapting using information technology, and what can the CPA recommend, or what can the CPA do to support those members. In conclusion, I just wanted to say that we appreciate this conversation. We appreciate the collaboration with ParlAmericas, but also with other organizations like the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Commonwealth Magistrate and Judges Association, the World Bank Network of Parliamentarians, and others, that we need to come together to look at what would be practicable in terms of dealing with the pandemic that's before us, but also in terms of moving forward in putting long-term measures that will help the recovery, but also that will help continuity in terms of business of parliaments in the Commonwealth and beyond. Lastly, I just want to thank all the participants who have signed up to this conversation, and also yet again the ParlAmericas for arranging this and for considering us as one of the relevant partners to coordinate this conversation today. Thank you very much.
That was a much appreciated intervention. Good morning, colleagues. Renard Henfield from the Bahamas. Now, it is my pleasure to be here with you this morning in this online meeting on virtual parliamentary sittings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to pause here for a brief moment just to convey to each presiding officer, parliamentarian, and clerk joining us today the kind regards of the President of ParlAmericas, Elizabeth Cabezas, a member of the National Assembly of Ecuador, and the kind regards of the member, well, first of all, Blanca Ovaler, who is the president of the ParlAmericas Open Parliamentary Network. She's a member of the Senate in Paraguay. Now, colleagues, we are all here today in recognition of the important role that our parliaments must play in the unprecedented crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to associate myself with the comments of the Director General, Leisha Todd. This pandemic has undoubtedly created a challenge for us as legislators. The current practice in some of our jurisdictions of suspending our parliaments for 14 to 30 days to only return for the singular purpose of extending emergency orders relative to COVID-19 cannot become the new normal for our parliaments. COVID-19 has created a global yet level playing field for all of our parliaments and presiding officers to be innovative while respecting our traditions. And it's in times of crisis that parliaments adapt and innovate. And our people in all of our countries have always found new ways of working during a crisis. So must we as parliamentarians and national leaders find a new way to conduct our constitutional work. Pardon me. So to perform our constitutional duties to the nation, we as forward-thinking legislators and transformative national leaders must adapt our legislatures to keep the democratic system alive in the hearts and minds of our electorate, our backbenchers and senators, our media, our NGOs, academia, and the private sector. You know, the question has been put elsewhere, and I believe it can be appropriately posed today. Is your parliament seen by your electorate, and does it see itself as the essential service it is? Does your parliament see itself as an essential service? You know, I believe we can save lives and livelihoods simultaneously, and we can address the health crisis and economic crisis at the same time. But I trust that we don't create a democratic crisis with our absence from our halls of parliament to debate, scrutinize, propose solutions, and just as important, voice the concerns of our disproportionate communities. As we already know, quite a few parliamentarians in other jurisdictions have successfully agitated for and modified their parliamentary rules of procedure so that their legislatures could routinely convene virtually and carry out their constitutional duties. Now, parliamentary representation is an essential service and it must go on, and I think we all agree, especially when our people are dealing with a health and economic crisis. And today we intend to explore how this essential service can carry on in each of our respective countries. As many of our parliaments explore the possibility of adapting our practices to allow our work to take place remotely, we are grateful to be joined today by three expert panelists whose parliaments have made this transition. First, the Honorable Warren Watterson is the Speaker of the House of Keys of Tynwald, Parliament of the Isle of Man. Leif Fernanda Bandeira de Melo, the Secretary General of the Board of the Senate of Brazil. And thirdly, Matthew Hamlin, Strategic Director of the Chamber Business Team of the House of Commons of the United Kingdom. Now, I just want to share with each of you today how we will conduct the meeting and the question and answer period. What we're going to do, we're going to allow each of those panelists to present for 10 minutes each. After their presentations, during their presentation, I'm going to ask you to keep your microphones on mute and hold your questions. And once they're done, we have a list of participants from the 14 countries. We're going to call on one member of each of those countries in the first round to make an intervention, whether that be posing a question to the panelists or sharing the experience of their parliament. And we're going to ask you to limit that to 2 minutes. After which, if we would have missed any country, we will come back around and call on those countries and then move into an open discussion. So again, first and foremost, I would like to invite our first presenter today, which would be the Honorable Warren Watterson, Speaker of the House of Keys of Tynwald, the Parliament of the Isle of Man, to make his contribution to our grouping today. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you, Chairman. Hello, fellow speakers, members, honourable members, and esteemed colleagues. It's great to see some familiar faces from the Caribbean and to meet new people. Like the rest of the world, the Isle of Man is part of the interconnected global community, and the spread of COVID-19 has touched countries big and small, rich and poor, and the Isle of Man has been no exception. The Parliament of the Isle of Man, Tynwald, is the oldest continuous parliament in the world, and in its history, which stretches back over 1,000 years, we have faced many crises, but nothing quite like this. Tynwald is made up of two branches, the House of Keys, elected by popular franchise of all over the age of 16, and the Legislative Council, which is comprised of the President of Tynwald, the Attorney General, Lord Bishop, and 8 members elected by the House of Keys acting as an electoral college. The branches sit separately to consider legislation, but meet monthly under normal circumstances to discuss finance, policy, and secondary legislation. My colleague, the Honourable Steve Roden, as President of Tynwald, presides over the sittings of Legislative Council and Tynwald Court, and I preside over sittings of the House of Keys. Since the coronavirus outbreak, we have held virtual sittings of Tynwald Court weekly rather than monthly, as well as sittings of both branches when required. Although our chambers are large enough to be reconfigured to allow for social distancing of its members, it was difficult to achieve this at all times, especially as we had to rotate around the building to allow everyone to use their voting button in the chamber. More concerningly, with an increasing number of members needing to self-isolate for various reasons, the numbers able to attend started to drop, which put our ability to achieve a quorum at risk. Looking at the prerequisites for our virtual Tynwald, the virtual solution seemed to have solved a lot of the problems, particularly around participation of those who were self-isolating, but it's brought additional challenges. The Isle of Man has been in a fortunate position with regards to all of the 5 prerequisites to achieve a virtual sitting. First, there's no legal or constitutional barrier to our sitting virtually. We do not have a written constitution, and no law requires us to meet physically in any particular place, just standing orders. Secondly, an online sitting requires a willingness and an ability of members to make it happen. The COVID-19 outbreak has seen a real pulling together in our community and our parliamentarians, and we shared a unanimous desire to echo the stay safe, stay home message of our healthcare professionals. Third, the Isle of Man also has exceptional broadband penetration at over 93% of the populace, and all members of Tynwald have access to broadband internet. Fortunately, all of our members also have enough technical savvy to participate online. Fourth, in the Isle of Man anyway, we're talking about manageable numbers. The House of Keys has 24 members, the Legislative Council has 11 members, and so in total around 40 people are included in the virtual solution, including clerks, Hansard, legislative drafters when needed, and a technical team who ensure the live feed is available on the internet and on local radio. Finally, we've also been supported by a small but absolutely first-class team who make Tynwald function, and their can-do attitude across clerks, chamber and Hansard have been remarkable and worked up the whole solution from concept to reality in a little over a week. Looking at the solution that we adopted in the Isle of Man, all members already have an iPad for the purposes of accessing their parliamentary papers, and that was configured with a basic version of Microsoft Teams, which provides audio and video streaming. The sittings were based in the Legislative Council chamber, which already had the setup for Hansard and the live link. Admittedly, the interface between Microsoft Teams and the live link Hansard audio feed was a bit Heath Robinson, Blue Peter, depending on the analogy that you want to use. But on testing, it works absolutely fine. We found that audio quality was particularly improved if members wore headsets with built-in microphones, and members' video was turned off, as was their audio until called to speak. Some good practice adopted here. The chat box within Teams was used only for members to indicate to the presiding officer that they wish to speak, call a division or interject, and this helped maintain the discipline of one person speaking at a time. We did discover during the test that we were at the mercy of the slowest broadband connection, which sadly meant dispensing with the visual element in Microsoft Teams, even for the person speaking. Microphones needed to remain on silent to ensure the person speaking could be heard clearly. And while these measures helped audio quality noticeably, we did miss out on some things that we take for granted in the chamber. Members could not participate in prayers in the same way, could not read the body language of other members, and the effects of humour were diminished as there was no instant feedback to what was said. It helped that members have been using iPads for some years to access their parliamentary papers, although the virtual sitting required members to access papers differently, perhaps via a desktop, or switch between applications. Because we were using the basic Microsoft Teams package, we didn't have access to voting buttons, and this meant voting yes or no in the chat box. Whilst members could vote quickly, tallying the votes just takes a couple of minutes. And this is in stark contrast to the electronic voting setup we have in the chamber. but to those of us who predate the 2006 electronic voting system, it was just like old times. It perhaps goes without saying that when the presiding officer is in a different room to the other members and cannot see them, there are a few differences to procedure. We have not yet sought to rewrite standing orders, but we suspend them in order for the sitting to take place virtually. However, we try to run sittings as closely as possible to the existing standing orders to provide as much continuity as possible. Even our sword of state, which is over 600 years old, was present in the chamber, and the point was made that the dress code would be harder to enforce, and the president did not make members bow to the iPad before leaving the virtual chamber. There was no speaker's procession, but the clerk announced that the speaker was present in the chamber to start the sitting. Members found that the virtual sitting to be a really positive development in meeting an urgent need. There was, of course, a significant amount of goodwill with members, both in terms of the exigencies of the situation and the use of the virtual sitting. Members have so far been keen to allow interventions and have been disciplined in speaking one at a time. A lot of the informal chatter does continue outside of the chamber via messaging on Telegram groups, which are already an established way of communicating whilst members are in the chamber. As far as the public were concerned, there was little appreciable difference, as Tynwald is usually broadcast on the radio rather than televised. It was really important, one of the lessons we've learned, to test the system with all members before an actual sitting. And this was achieved by asking all members to log in 15 to 20 minutes beforehand to allow for technical issues to be addressed. We still opened the roll call 20 minutes prior to the start of the sitting, and we engineered a statement and questions and trialed email and chat box voting. We've identified the need for a better way of dealing with voting than at present, but it's not urgent, and we believe that this is available in an upgrade of Teams. So far, in terms of the branches, we've also taken 2 emergency bills through from first reading through to royal assent. We've dealt with questions and dozens of emergency regulations. I should point out that, as an aside, virtual committee proceedings and evidence taking are not new. And coincidentally, I was the first to chair a committee that took evidence over video links some 10 years ago. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the COVID-19 emergency of 2020 has had many far-reaching impacts on the Manx way of life, many of which are yet to be realised. However, with our borders effectively closed and people being encouraged to stay home as far as possible, it has inspired a collective will to lead by example and trial a virtual sitting. The hard work and ingenuity of our staff is to be applauded, and the system will no doubt continue to be refined if the current emergency endures. This will be our way of doing business during these difficult times, but I feel it's unlikely to endure afterwards due to the limitations which are more easily overcome by a physical sitting than better technology. The experience has shown that the Isle of Man has lived up to its motto, synonymous with our 3-legged flag, of quocunque jeceris stabit, or whichever way you throw me, I will stand. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was very informative and helpful for all of us. Moving on, I would like to invite our second expert panelist, Leif Fernanda and Dara de Melo. If you can present and share with us today. Everyone else, please mute your microphones for us and hold your questions.
Okay, hello everybody. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very glad and very honored to be able to address some words to all of you. Well, in the person of Senator Hannah Hanfield from Bahamas, today's chairman, I would like to thank ParlAmericas and the CPA, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I would like also to greet Mr. Juan Watterson, Honorable Speaker of the House of the Isle of Man, Mr. Matthew Hamlin from the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, and Mrs. Alicia Todd and Harvis Matia from ParlAmericas and the CPA. Thank you very much. Well, I would like to start this 10 minutes presentation with a motto that our team has spontaneously adopted during this pandemic situation. In times of crisis, Parliament cannot stop. Along with universal and periodical elections, the normal operation of Parliament is the most obvious and indispensable element of a nation's democratic nature. Today, our aim here is to share the expertise, the know-how, well, in the French sense of savoir-faire, developed by the Brazilian Senate as of March the 13th, and also learn from your experience. When we identified the imminent risk represented by the senators' on-site meeting in the Brazilian capital, we concluded this gathering should not take place due to the coronavirus pandemic outbreak. First of all, what do we understand as the Brazilian Senate remote deliberation system, STR in the Portuguese acronym? Well, it's a system made of 4 parts. First, a video conferencing tool provided by a third-party enterprise, the same we are using right now in this meeting. A remote protocol, legislative protocol tool developed by the IT team of the Brazilian Senate. A remote secure voting tool developed by a Brazilian enterprise hired by the Senate in 7 calendar days, it's being developed. And a set of operational guidelines in the how-to-do basis to integrate these other 3 solutions. Well, SDR, our system, remote deliberation system, STR in Portuguese acronym, video conferencing solution was implemented at the Brazilian Senate through the same software you're using right now, as I said, and it was chosen due to the features essential to the smooth running of the session, such as the control of the participants' microphones in order to avoid multiple speakers at the same time. This feature is associated with the possibility of virtually raising hands to speak by means of a digital button. Sure. Thus, it is possible to maintain the order of the speeches, something crucial to hand the floor to all members in an organized manner. In addition, in devices such as a desktop computer or notebooks, the software is capable of simultaneously showing the video for a greater number of participants, up to 45, than other similar solutions. At the Brazilian Senate, the software was acquired in a version that allows for the simultaneous participation of up to 300 users. Well, in addition, participants who do not have access to the internet or a device with the necessary resources for their participation at the time of the session will be able to access it by a conventional toll-free telephone number, which is quite relevant in locations where internet access is not sufficiently stable. For this, the video conferencing software provides a toll-free telephone number and a specific access code for the meeting. The participants' connection will work in the same way as the others, but without, the video broadcast, only voice. At the Brazilian Senate, we have chosen to go 100% remote. I'm aware that other parliaments, like UK, like the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies, the House of Representatives of Brazil, have preferred to adopt a semi-remote solution with some members of parliament, especially party leaders, physically present at the hall. Well, let me show you some pictures of the implementation of a solution. Mr. Chairman, if you allow me, I will try to share my screen. Let me see if I do it right. Do you see the screen now?
It's coming up.
Okay.
There you go. You're good.
Okay. So, as I said, in Brazilian Here you see our virtual plenary. We call it our bunker. Is our space and central infrastructure of the video conference. Although the video conferencing software is accessible by any kind of device, such as a desktop computer, a notebook, or a mobile phone, the use of a centralized space with better infrastructure to chair the meeting is paramount. This place gathers the chair of the session, the speaker of the house, the secretaries, the filming crew, among other people essential to record keeping and the smooth running of the business. At the Brazilian Senate, we will use a space, a space with 6 workstations with microphones and webcams, which accommodate, in addition to the chair, the rapporteur, the secretary, and assistants. The closeness of these participants, keeping the 2 meters distance, allows the chair to conduct the session while their assistants control the microphones, the order of speeches, and calculate the votes when necessary. At the same time, other teams, such as the communication team, do the proper broadcasting. It is necessary, for instance, that the microphones control be done in person to ensure the promptness of granting the floor. In addition to the workstations connected to the internet, the Senate space has a video wall with 14 screens, like you see now, with 14 screens of 55 inches controlled by 2 computers and a sound system. We understand, however, that a minimum requirement is the existence of 3 screens of 15 inches, for example, the one on the left showing the voting panel, the one in the middle focused on the MP who is speaking, what gives the impression of face-to-face dialogue with the Speaker of the House, the Chairman, and the one on the right with a matrix showing the video of the other participants. This arrangement can be done, for example, with a single computer controlling the 3 screens, or with 2 computers, one showing the voting panel and another showing the video conferencing images. Well, and how do we process a vote done by the 0800 toll-free number? The senator that is in location without internet connection will pronounce his or her vote orally, and the senator next to the president, to the Speaker of the House, will make the proper vote in front of the cameras in the place of the senator that just voted. The voting panel shows the orientation of each party. I'll show it to you. This is the voting panel that the speaker sees, and is also available on the internet for anyone. So we see the orientation of each party leader and how each senator voted. Now, in this vote here, you see a very polemic vote that you have some parties saying no, some parties say yes, and each senator has done his vote. We also had to deal with the situation of a new senator that had to take possession of his duty during a remote session. So we have done this inside the plenary bunker, and the other senators saw the new senator take his oath remotely. So you see in the picture how this has been done. Well, I would like, this is in this address that you may eventually check it out. We have all the instructions, the handbook, the transfer, the technology transfer handbook. The Senate, Brazilian Senate, has prepared in 4 languages: Portuguese, English, Spanish, and French, to share our experience and say how we have done this. I don't want to say that we have done the best way, or this is the only way. Is not the only way, sure. We just heard from the Mr. Speaker of the Isle of Man a different way of doing it, but it's a way that worked. So we would like to share this expertise, this know-how, and you can access this hot site to get a little more information. Well, let I come back to my explanation. I'm afraid of losing my time. I have only 10 minutes. Well, I would like to address some words, especially to my counterparts responsible for the management of the legislative process of parliaments. Secretary General of the Board, like me, Secretary of the Presidency, Clerk, like my colleague from Canada and United Kingdom, Legislative Director General, Director General, or whatever job title you wish to give. I am addressing especially to the person responsible for organizing the legislative process, but also for sure, all the members of Parliament and their staff. First, the Senate Remote Deliberation System, STR, was designed to work in emergencies like wars, natural disasters, pandemics, when the on-site meetings are not possible. The rules set for operation of the system presuppose this condition. Therefore, we recommend using remote deliberation only to vote on matters related to the emergency or matters that cannot wait for the normalization of the situation. I believe that the use of this instrument should not be trivialized. Although it is modern and sophisticated and even fancy, it has the natural limitations imposed by physical distance. I am convinced that personal and direct contact between the members of Parliament is essential for a good parliamentary debate. I would like to recommend that the remote sessions have one single item on the agenda. If necessary, more than one session can be held on the same day. This will allow the members of Parliament to log in specifically at the time of discussion of topics of their interest. This will minimize connection problems, unnecessary extensions of the sessions, and confusion of members upon signing up to discuss different items of the agenda. I also recommend that remote sessions, or virtual sessions, as some call it, begin directly with the order of business, discussing and/or voting on the single item in the agenda. I'm sorry to say, I would like to pass these little tips, operational tips that have been very useful for us. So excuse me if I'm exaggerating a little bit in the details of the operation. I guess it might be interesting. Equally, I understand that STR should only be used in plenary session, not in committee sessions. We have done already committee sessions, but we thought that the better functioning is directly in plenary, also because of our rules in our Parliament. The matters that are relative to the pandemic, they are urgent, and so they go directly to the plenary. Obviously, other parliaments may have different approaches to this issue. I recommend also that the roles be very clearly established. An employee should be responsible for connecting the microphone of the next speaker. That person must be physically next to the president, the speaker, the chairman of the session. Also, the at president's side should be the employee responsible for passing orally to the president the regimental instructions and drafts of forwarding matters. These two people may or may not be the same. At the Senate, we have chosen to assign these two critical functions to two different persons. One person should be responsible for turning off the microphone of the speaker, and this person should ideally be different from the person who turns on the microphone, because the operation must be fast. A microphone that has not been turned off at the appropriate time may allow the leak of comments made by the MP or by a third party next to them, in addition to the interruption of the audio and the video of the following speaker. So it's very important to turn off the speaker of the member of parliament that just spoke. However, the person responsible for turning off the microphone does not need to be physically close to the president and does not need to be responsible for this role alone. Someone, however, will necessarily have to perform that role. Well, if the operator assigned to a function loses their connection, they must immediately notify their alternate. A clear chain of command and replacement, almost military-like, if I mean, is required. Any failure in a remote deliberation system can make the difference between a good participation and the embarrassment for the parliamentarian. I reiterate that because the video conference solution was not developed specifically for parliaments. It is a corporate tool designed for professional meetings, adapted with a whole set of rules that are explained in our technology transfer handbook in the hot site I just showed you. Well, finally, here's my most sensitive recommendation. I believe it is essential that a qualified employee, this is very important, a qualified employee should have access to the MP's passwords, at least when the system is first implemented. In the experience of the Brazilian Senate, this control was personally and solely under my responsibility. I will explain that. I was responsible for informing the senators of their passwords. I understand completely that in lawmaking institution with greater number of members, this can be a problem. I also understand that from the information security point of view, the existence of a reliable third party, how they say in IT, is a vulnerability of the system. However, and despite all this, I still recommend that an employee with the proper credentials have access to at least the MP's first password. I was personally requested by several senators to remind them of their passwords. And I am convinced that we would not have reached the impressive 100% attendance mark in our remote sessions had we not done this. I'm aware that other parliaments around the world have already had experience with remote sessions at these times, and I'm very curious to learn about it. However, at least based on the information I had access to, we held apparently in Brazil on March the 20th, the first 100% remote session with nominal, electronic, and safe voting. It had the successful attendance of all senators. And it has been 18 remote sessions already up to now. This is the reason for our effort to share this technology with other parliaments with the speed required by the current global health pandemic. Well, finally, I'm just about to end. I would like to ask for the permission of our chairman, Mr. Senator Hannah Heinfeld, to show a 3-minute video produced by the Senate and already dubbed in English that explains how the Brazilian senators may vote by their cell phones. May I show it, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, that's fine. It's a 3-minute video, and then we're going to move on quickly to our third presenter.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do it immediately. So let's go for it.
This video is a tutorial on how to use version 1.1 of the Brazilian Senate remote deliberation system. When a voting session starts, each senator receives on their mobile phone a link sent by the Secretariat General of the Board. In the System Access page, enter your identification code, the same one used for voting in the plenary hall. Then enter the password previously sent by the Secretariat General of the Board. This password is the same one used for remote debate sessions. To prevent typing errors, you can click on this image to visualize the password while entering it. Then, click on the I'm Not a Robot button, and after that, click on Access. When there is an open voting session, the summary and the number of the bill appear on the screen. These are the options for voting: yes, abstention, or no. When the senator chooses one of these, a screen will open to take a picture of the senator. The picture is an authentication tool. A pop-up may ask permission to access your camera. Always reply yes. The picture must be taken to register your vote. After adjusting your image, click on Take a Picture. Then click on Confirm Picture. If necessary, another picture can be taken by going over the procedure again. You will next receive an SMS or WhatsApp message with a code to enter into the system and confirm your vote. Please note, if no message arrives, click here to get a new code. If still no message arrives, the device is probably in an area without a good network connection. In this case, click on the red button that reads Secretariat General of the Board. Our team will contact you for assistance. When your vote has been confirmed, the following will pop up on your screen. Vote successfully registered. In addition to the vote, the system allows access to the Pino tab, which contains the same information as the Senate plenary pane. Inside this tab, you can see Leadership Guidance and List, where you can check on the senators who have already voted, organized by state. Please note, the Panel tab will be available before you vote if you need to consult the guidance of your party leader. You may change your vote anytime while the voting session is in course. In this case, you will need to go through the whole confirmation procedure again. When the voting session is closed, just click on the Panel tab to check the result. Enjoy!
Well, that's it. That's all, folks. And thank you very much for this opportunity. And remember, in times of crisis, Parliament cannot stop. Thank you very much. And if you can, stay home.
I would like to thank Mr. Bander de Mello for a great presentation, very informative. And we are now going to move on to our third presenter for this morning, Mr. Matthew Hamlin, Strategic Director of the Chamber Business Team of the House of Commons in the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to this distinguished group. I feel slightly unfair having had a dazzling presentation from Brazil, who are with a PowerPoint and a video, and also coming after the Isle of Man, who've been running parliaments for longer than anyone else. So I will try and keep my remarks fairly brief, because I know that there'll be a lot of questions, and I don't have an elaborate presentation. So to give you a very quick overview of where the United Kingdom House of Commons has got to, following some of the headings in the session guide, which was sent around earlier. As has already been mentioned by our Brazilian colleague, the House of Commons agreed on what we call a hybrid or semi-remote model of proceeding. This arose from a political desire by the political leadership of the parties to ensure that members who wish to exercise their right to attend physically would be allowed to do so, but also designed to ensure that they would not get any special treatment or particular benefit by turning up in person rather than attending virtually. So both our new standing orders and our practice is ensured that. It should be seen in a wider setting of a desire to ensure the public health objectives are met. So the Speaker and the party leaders have throughout the crisis encouraged members not to attend at Westminster unless they really have to. That's been a kind of political message. It's been reinforced by the fact that we have rearranged our chamber so that no more than about 50 MPs can actually attend in it. That's to ensure proper social distancing. So for those members who do turn up, they will see a House of Commons with much of the seating closed off, with additional signage in the chamber and additional guidance about members interacting with each other, interacting with the chair of proceedings and with staff. And that has been very closely followed by MPs. And in fact, very few MPs are coming to the estate. I think no more than 50 or 60 out of our 650 have been in the building on any given day in the last couple of weeks. So thinking about the political background, the single biggest, most important aspect of this was political agreement among all the parties to what was being proposed. So the Speaker made clear to us as staff that he wanted a mechanism for members to scrutinise government during this time of crisis. Parliament could not simply shut and go away. The government wanted the ability to continue to pass legislation. So that gave us a very clear customer requirement, shall we say, for what they wanted. And as a result, we cracked on extremely fast to deliver the biggest change in how the House of Commons works in the last 700 years, I think. We made all our select committees into virtual committees. They no longer have any physical meetings at all. And we're having 15 or 20 such meetings a week, supported by our broadcast team, by committee staff. That happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. The main chamber, we moved to our hybrid proceedings just over a week ago. We've had 4 of these new hybrid sittings. Because of the political agreement, we were able to consult widely on the changes to our standing orders that were required to make this happen. So by the time Parliament came back from its Easter recess, we had agreement to proceed. The House agreed the necessary changes very quickly, and we were ready technically to roll. We had rehearsals as well. Unlike the Tinwild, we did not have a chance to do a live test with real members, but we had 2 rehearsals with the Speaker and Deputy Speakers and a lot of staff. So by the time we came to day 1, we were pretty confident. I would also say that the politicians, the members of Parliament, were very understanding about potential technical difficulties. And in fact, so far, things have gone surprisingly smoothly. And I'm crossing my fingers as I say that. We've had yet no major disasters. Where we've lost an MP, we've managed to get him back again, sometimes with full video, sometimes we've switched straight to audio, which is generally more reliable. Another important thing about what has been lost as well as what has been achieved. As I say, we've lost some of the spontaneity, the cut and thrust of debate in the chamber, and in the longer term it will be really interesting to learn how to manage those spontaneous interventions with live broadcast. So that's something we will have to work on, I think, as this goes on. The second point I'd make is that this is quite resource intensive, and a lot of people still need to be on site in our broadcasting hub managing proceedings, even when they are virtual, even if they were fully virtual. We've had to bear in mind information security considerations, and that involves maybe working with slightly more risk than we normally would, because Zoom is not an entirely secure platform, as we know, and therefore we were continuing to look for more secure ways of broadcasting what is basically a video conference meeting. I'm very conscious that the UK Parliament is large, mature, well-resourced, and we are working very hard to deliver this. So for smaller parliaments or parliaments with fewer resources, all I can really recommend is focus on what's really important in your proceedings. You know, drop anything you don't have to do, and as parliamentary staff, I think be very honest and very transparent with your political leadership, with your members of parliament, about what is really deliverable and what can be sustained over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 months. A quick fix can work, but the longer term planning requires more work and some hard choices about what you can and can't do. I'll stop there because I want to allow time for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hamlin. Again, that was very informative, and we're going to move quickly, for the sake of time, into the question and answer period. And if time permits, then hopefully we'll move into a broader discussion. As I indicated earlier, in the format, we have the 14 countries that are present, and we're going to call on one member from each of those countries as we go down the list to make an intervention. That can be a question for one of the panelists, or it can be you sharing your experience from your parliament. I'm going to begin with the speaker from Anguilla, the Honorable Terry Harrigan.
There are a lot of issues that during a time like this, when we are going through the pandemic experience, although we in Anguilla have been able to just record 3 cases and have been, as it were, COVID-free for the last 3 days. But one of the things that I got from one of the presentations was that the idea of the virtual meetings, and we had sort of discussed that in the House of Assembly, but we do have a certain constitutional guidelines that limit us to some extent to have those kinds of meetings, because I think it clearly states, and our clerk will probably be able, I know he's listening as well, but able to bail me out on this, because we did present that possibility initially when the pandemic started, and we were asked to meet in person. My question is how does that bear out with certain constitutional restraints in our parliament, and how would we go about establishing that in the future and presently, should things become worse? We have virtual meetings talking about.
Okay, well, panelists, if either of you or all of you would like to chime in on that question with respect to how does going virtual correlate with the constitutional guidelines in specifically Anguilla. I'm sure other countries have that concern.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of the Isle of Man, we don't have a constitutional framework that restricts us to saying we have to meet in person. What we have taken the view of is, because we host the meeting in the Legislative Council chamber, that the meeting is still held in Douglas. The meeting is still held in the capital, in the chamber, even though not every member is physically present there. We do have a requirement, again, in standing orders, that members are required to be physically present during the sitting, but of course we're able to waive that standing order, suspend that standing order for the purposes of our sittings, because it's not in the law, it's not in any constitutional document. So we're looking that way, that we have that sort of flexibility. So I think some of it might be down to interpretation, but it might also be that there's a requirement there to get perhaps a blanket approach from the Privy Council for some of our colleagues in the Caribbean.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. All right, we'll then move on to Antigua and Barbuda. Madam President, Senator Alicia Williams-Grant, are you with us today?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everybody. Very happy to be a part of this process. Just saying hello to familiar faces and persons we haven't seen in a while. I am very grateful for this opportunity, and just to share our experience in the past couple of months. We've had, I believe, at least 2 sittings, particularly to deal with the emergency regulations and legislative provisions, which facilitated the lower house meeting virtually. They were able to pull that off. The upper house, the Senate, we actually had meetings where social distancing practices were implemented. We do have some concerns still insofar as the legislative provisions, the constitutionality issues which Speaker Terry spoke of or referred to. My concern in particular, if the, particularly those from the UK and the Isle of Man could explain, how did you deal with the symbols of authority in the process, that is the mace and those things that empower the presiding officers under the, well, you don't have written constitutions, but under the usual practices and procedures of Parliament. Also, I know Senator Henfield, you mentioned that we were recognized, and we all know that we're essential, and as parliamentarians, and Parliament must continue irrespective. One of the things that has been happening is that we've had the call for parliamentarians to give up and forego their salaries during this time. And as essential service providers, I'm not sure how you have been dealing with it in your respective jurisdictions. I know that we've discussed this time and time again at many of our meetings that we are already part-time parliamentarians. Well, we perform work full-time, but we get paid as part-time parliamentarians. It'd be interesting to hear how the other jurisdictions have been dealing with this. And last concern of mine is the psychological and emotional impact that this is having on our members of the House, of the respective houses. How has the experience been? I know for me, I'm so accustomed to going, as my mom says, like the Energizer Bunny, and now having to be seated and isolated and locked away and doing all the work of being school teacher, wife, baker, still do parliamentary work, still account to the people for the answers as to what's happening. How are we catering for our well-being mentally and emotionally, and how are we going to be readying ourselves to go back into the work of parliamentary on a full-time basis when this all passes? Also, just to mention, of course, because we are small parliaments, limited resources at this time, and the economical impact that this COVID environment is having on our small economies, particularly for us in the OECS region. It's something that I was bowled over by the example that Brazil demonstrated with all the technological resources, the availability of iPads, even in the Isle of Man. My dear Speaker Watterson, you know, we are already restrained, we are already restricted, we have salaries to look for, our economies are tourism based, there's nobody coming. How do you assist, and how can the organizers in particular, and kudos again to ParlAmericas and the CPA for this meeting, but how are you going to be able to assist us in meeting these demands and commitments in light of the already devastating impact it's having on our financial resources and ability to provide the services that are essential as parliamentarians? Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Madam Senate President, sorry. So panelists and Secretary General, if you can chime in to Madam President's intervention.
In my characteristic brevity, in terms of the symbols of authority, we do have, as I said, the sword of state, 600 years old, and we put that on the table in front of the President to represent the authority which we act under. In terms of foregoing salary, yeah, we've had this one as well. Aren't the public lovely? It's an individual choice. And one of the real strengths of the system in the Isle of Man is that the pay of parliamentarians is linked in law to the pay of the civil service. So we are tagged, we are equated to a grade in the civil service. So we get whatever the civil service get. We don't routinely vote on our own salaries. And that's very liberating. And it's something that I would strongly recommend to anybody about parliamentary pay, because then if it's negotiated somewhere else, someone else deals with it, and we just get it, don't get it, whatever it might be. We're not constantly having to vote for our own pay. In terms of the psychological issues, that really is a tough one. Communications is harder. And everything takes longer anyway, because you're doing things by email, by messaging. You can't just wander down the corridor and stick your head around someone's door. That's a real loss. So it takes a bit more active thought to check in with members that you haven't seen for a while. And we are seeing a lot of use of alternative text and a lot of popping up of alternative WhatsApp and Telegram groups on different issues to try and deal with different problems. In terms of support, certainly I know that me and my colleagues in Tynwald are always happy to be on the end of a phone or an iPad or a video conference in terms of any practical tips and support that we can give, certainly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Speaker Watterson.
Chair, if I could just quickly add from the UK House of Commons perspective, the Speaker of the House of Commons wanted to use the chamber for running proceedings. So he is seated in the Speaker's chair. The mace is brought in at the start of proceedings. I think that was essentially a personal preference of the Speaker, but it does give additional authority to the proceedings. I think they would still have been valid proceedings if you were doing them somewhere else. We would have made that clear through resolutions of the House if necessary, but that was the view of the Speaker. On the mental health issue, I think the previous speaker has made some really good points about members. I would just say exactly the same things apply to parliamentary staff now they're working remotely. We do need to go on supporting each other using different ways than we've done previously.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Mr. Bandila de Melo would like to add to this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator. I would like to try to answer Senator Alicia Williams. She asked us about costs of the implementation of the solution, also the psychological effect, and the previous question was about the constitutional changing you had to do. Well, about costs, we have the minimum requirements for doing a session like we've done in the Brazilian Senate would be 3 television, 50 inches television, 2 computers, and 1 signature of a Zoom or other software, about $200 a month. So it's quite affordable. The app for voting would be a little bit more expensive. In Brazil, have expanded about $50,000 to buy that software. But it is not necessary. The senator can vote by voice, and I'll explain this in our hot site. Well, about the psychological problems, it would be the senators. They are very stressed at this moment inside their homes. They would like to share physically with the others, but it's impossible in this moment. But we had a very difficult thing to deal with in the beginning. There was how to deal with the analogic senators. If you know what I mean, we have senators 86, 85, 80 years of age, and it's not very easy for them to always to connect to a video conference, especially if they are alone at their homes. So we had to implement a help desk to help with that. And about constitutional problems, no, we didn't have, because our constitution already have a norm that says that the Congress can can seat for a session in Brasilia, in Brazilian capital, or whatever it decides to, if not possible to sit in Brasilia. Whatever it decides to can be also virtually. So we didn't have problem to that. Our only limitation is for the secret vote. We have some secret votes for authorities, for the Supreme Court, for example. And these votings, our rules, they exige biometrics for the secret votings, and we're not going to send biometrics of the senators by the internet. So we won't do secret voting by internet. Only when we come back, I hope soon. I hope in real short time we can go back to presential. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And finally, before we move on to the Bahamas, Madam President, wanted to just clarify or add something on the issue of the mace. Madam President from Antigua and Barbuda.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Senator Chairman. I just wanted to say that one of the things that we experience, I have asthma, which is a pre-existing condition. Well, I'm told I have asthma. So I could not preside over the last 2 sessions of the Senate. I refused to go to the building. And so what we had was in the lower houses, in the instance of the lower house meeting, the speaker was present, the mace, the clerk, and the sergeant at arms. So the symbols of authority were there physically. And that's why I asked the question, because for me, if it is that we're going to continue to do this for a period of time into 18 months when we get a vaccine, it means then that I will never preside again over the sitting, because I am looking at my pre-existing position to, so I was trying to see how we could, well, I guess that means that physically the mace will have to come to me or in a different environment to facilitate that. So that's why I was keen on ascertaining exactly how the symbols of authority were treated in Isle of Man and in the UK. So I'm very grateful for the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So third on our list then is the Bahamas. I understand we have Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly, Donald Saunders. MP Saunders.
Good afternoon or good morning, colleagues. I don't know, Senator Henfield, it's a curiosity. The speaker, I got in a bit late on the session. I had some problems getting on. So I'm really using my my phone right now, so I apologize. Before I make my comments, I just wanted to know, did any of the Bahamian delegates make any comments yet before? Because I don't want to repeat anything that they might have said.
No, what I indicated in the beginning is that in this segment, which is the first round, we're going to have one person from each country speak, okay, and then we'll come to a wider discussion in the second round if you have time. You can go ahead.
All right, fair enough. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's interesting when I hear my colleague from the Caribbean. I say that we have similar concerns as she does, in the sense that we have had we've had sessions in the Bahamas. However, we've decided to do those sessions with a limited amount of members of Parliament present, both in the Senate and in the House of Assembly, or at least making sure that there's social distancing in both houses. We had to reconfigure our House of Assembly to accommodate that, and I think and also to show our support and to persons from in the society at large. There was an issue, interestingly, with regards to whether or not we would be able to still constitutionally hold meetings without the presence of the symbol of authority of the speaker, the mace. That discussion was had, but and I'm starting to be corrected by my colleagues in the Bahamas, but I'm sure that was never concluded. In any event, we decided to continue with our meetings in the House and in the Senate. Interestingly, the question as it relates to salaries also became a hot topic, particularly in social media, with firstly by several members of Parliament, whether it was done for political gain or otherwise, saying that they would give up their salaries to the cis persons in the community, or were they willing to give up their salaries. Unlike, I think it was the Isle of Man, we've read that other jurisdictions, their salaries are attached or are dealt with through the civil service. I'm for sure one of those persons in the Bahamas who think that we should have a similar policy or similar laws in the Bahamas, because, like my Caribbean colleague, Madam President, we have to vote to increase our salaries, and we've not had an increase in salary in the Bahamas in 30 years. So we've been on the same salary, parliamentarians, for the last over 30 years now. And it's a hot political issue whenever it's raised. And so consecutive parties have kind of put it on the back burner. And obviously, like my Caribbean colleague, we're quote unquote considered part-time, but as we know, it's never a part-time job because we're always working 24 hours, if I may add. And so it is something that has to be addressed, in my view. With regards to technology, and the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, they would also, I think, share this view that we are in the process of trying to modernize our Parliament. We've had discussions, Alicia Speaker and I and several other members of Parliament, on, and this is a good, the situation we're in now is a good reason for us to revisit it. I mean, we don't have laptops or iPads for members of Parliament and senators in the Bahamas. And this would have been an ideal time for us to have those. I know all of us would have our phones, all of us would have our PCs at home or in our offices, but I think it's important that we not only have those iPads and computers for these type of situations with this pandemic, but also to make our parliaments and our houses, parliaments, paperless. We've experienced over and over again high volumes of paper. I don't know why we still do it in the Bahamas, but we have high volumes of paper that most members of Parliament most of the time just disregard. And I think if they had it on a laptop or iPad, that they could go to it on the bus, they could go to it in their spare times on the beach, wherever they go. But I do think that we have to, this session, I'll end on this, Senator, but I think, and I spoke to the Speaker about this in the Bahamas, I think this is a good opportunity for us again, particularly in these small jurisdictions, to learn from each other and to try and reintroduce our colleagues the necessity for some of these, for us to address some of these issues. As simple as it might seem to some other jurisdictions, the issue of whether or not we could hold parliaments and other places. I know our cabinet, for example, hold meetings on different islands in the Bahamas. I don't remember, and I stand to be corrected, that there's any provisions in our constitution for that. So should we look at that? Should we look at making sure moving forward with respect to how do we deal with these emergency situations, whether it be a pandemic or a disease, or whether it even be, God forbid, some national security issues and wars, etc. How does the Parliament meet in these small jurisdictions? And the use of modern technology in that regard. Now, I'll end on this, the issue of the psychological impact. For sure, for me, I've been working from home while going to Parliament and so forth where necessary. But I think all of us are experiencing the same thing here in the Bahamas and in other jurisdictions. And I think we've had parliamentary sessions through similar forms such as Zoom and I forget the other system we're using here. But I think if we were to implement that on a more consistent basis, that these type of processes will be more familiar to parliamentarians, and that it would definitely enhance our ability to communicate with each other and to be able to share ideas more instantly. I would just say that I hope that some of this information that we're sharing, and particularly my Bahamian colleagues, we would be able to share those with our colleagues, likewise in other jurisdictions. And unfortunately, I know sharing this information a lot of times doesn't mean that there's going to be some positive reaction. But I think if we really push the idea and say, listen, this is what our colleagues are doing, and they are recommending it. I know, Senator, we could put that in the form that we're recommending that we revisit these things and take these matters very seriously, so that all of our parliaments could collectively move forward. Thank you, Senator and colleagues.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. We now move on to an amazing host from another beautiful country, Barbados, Speaker of the House of Assembly, Speaker Holder. If you can pose your questions or your experience in Barbados for the rest of us.
Good morning to all. My questions are very interesting. At the commencement of Parliament in Barbados, approval is sought and obtained from the Governor General for Parliament to sit at a specific location. And obviously it must be in person. So that to move from a sitting in Parliament to a virtual sitting, one must first obtain some legal authority. So that I would like to know for the Speaker of the Isle of Man, for example, what constitutional and legislative framework do they have in place so that allows them to meet virtually? For us, for example, we are looking at the idea of meeting virtually, and that would call for an amendment to our Standing Order 669, which speaks to Parliament being held if the Minister wants Parliament to meet in the public interest in an emergency session. Then we could amend our Standing Order 6.9 to allow for that. But outside of that, then we will need to have concurrence from the Governor General then to meet. So for a classic example is that our Parliament buildings are now being cleaned. So we have moved from Parliament in town to a new locality in Worthing, Christchurch, and to so do, we had to obtain approval from the Governor General. So it'd be interesting to ascertain from my Caribbean colleagues on what legislative authority are you using if you are contemplating to meet virtually because of the COVID-19. That is basically what I would like to ask of the Speaker of the Isle of Man, and also to my parliamentary colleagues who want to meet. Obviously, for Parliament in our parliamentary democracy, we must meet, notwithstanding that we are in a pandemic situation. So that is merely my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what we're going to do right now, we'll allow for the moment any of the panelists want to respond, and then we're going to quickly allow each of the other countries to chime in, and then we'll come in the end and ask the panelists to respond to everybody, just so everybody gets an opportunity to chime in. Speaker Watterson, go ahead.
Thanks, Arthur, for the question. As I said, we don't have a restriction in law. We only have a restriction in standing orders, and we can suspend standing orders with 2/3 of the members' approval. I suppose my challenge back is, why does your constitution have a requirement to ask the Governor General as to where you meet and when and how? We don't have that. I don't know why. Maybe it's a historical part of your constitution, and whether it's still fit for purpose in the 21st century, I don't know, but we don't have that restriction, and that was really helpful in terms of helping us move forward.
Okay. All right, thank you so much, Speaker Watterson. We're going to move on then to the next country, which would be Bermuda. Speaker of the House of Assembly, Dennis Lister, if you can just share your intervention, whether it's a question or your experience. If it's a question, we're going to allow you to share it, and then we'll come in the end and ask for a response to the various questions. So, Speaker Lister.
Good morning, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Mine is more comment than question, in that we have actually used both, meaning a limited number of members of Parliament in the House during the session and one total virtual. And let me give a little background in that. When the pandemic restrictions started to come in place, we were just closing our Parliament from our budget session. So we closed our Parliament a little earlier, and the expectation was that we wouldn't go back again until May 8th, which is next week, Friday. However, there was always in our mind that should the emergency requirements force us to have to go to Parliament, we will have to do it under some restriction. And on April 6th, the Premier asked us to sit on April 6th to put in the first set of emergency measures and the proclamation from the governor. I said to him then, sure, we'll do it. And it was a quick request for us to say, but we definitely would do it under a format that reflected what we were asking the community to do, to live in the social distancing and order restrictions of working from home, etc. We should at least set the example as the leadership of the country. So we set that meeting as the only requirement of a quorum to be present and not all the members. I spoke to both leaders, the government leader and the opposition leader, and said, here's the requirements that I'm requesting. If we're going to do it, we'll have a quorum. You can select your members, whichever come, but I just want a quorum in there. All members wanted to participate. So what I done in the House set was that I made recognition that all members wanted to participate, and I counted all members as being present because of my request that they weren't present. So that was one that I just put out there. But to speak to the authority to do it, my view again, it's leadership of the country. We're asking the country to take all sorts of steps with emergency measures that are in place, working from home, social distancing, then we should take the same type of example in our leadership role. And it was no way I was going to have Parliament sit in its full capacity in the House. So that was the basis for me. Our standing orders, when the House sat, I asked simply that standing orders be suspended to allow us to operate this way. That was on April 6th. Again, the expectation was after that we still wouldn't get back until May 8th, but we were called back on the 17th to pass an additional piece of emergency regulations. And the Premier on that occasion gave me notice basically 48 hours before we were due. And my quick response to him was that we will do it, but we will not do it under a restricted format like we've done for the first sitting. We will definitely go to a virtual sitting because again, I expect that we will be under this measure, emergency measures for a period of time. And when we go back on the 8th to do the normal business, it will have to be in another format. So let's use this occasion to practice and do a practice run on the virtual space. And within 48 hours, we had it up and running. And it was done with myself, really, I'd explain it in two ways. I think for any success of it, you have to have there's a technical piece, and then there's the functionality piece. We work with a good team of technical people, including the technical officers of my office and the technical department from government. And between the two, we were able to get the package right for us. But the functionality was for me as a speaker who has to control and conduct the meeting. I had to fully understand the capability of the system. And we didn't use Zoom because I think Zoom doesn't provide all the securities that I think a government or Parliament should have. We went to Cisco WebEx meetings, which I think is more secure. But it was understanding all the buttons and bells and whistles and that allowed the speaker to control the House as he would if he was sitting in the chamber. And it was a around-the-clock exercise for those 48 hours. I'll tell you that, to get schooled up and to understand it. And then I done a dry run the night before. This was on the Wednesday to Thursday. We done a dry run with almost all members participating late that night, just getting them up to speed, what I expected, how it would run. And then on the Friday, we sat and conducted the business for that emergency measure. Granted, both of those occasions were short meetings, short sessions, because we were just dealing with the emergency measures requirements that we needed to put those things in place. Next Friday will be our first full session that we'll sit, and again, I'll use the virtual space for that. Both our houses, the Senate and the President and Parliament used it. We likewise brought the senators and the President and Senate up to speed on what had to be done. For the actual sitting, and if I'm going a little fast, I know my time is limited here, but for the actual sitting, myself and the Senate President were in the chamber, and the Assistant Clerk was in the chamber, and the Sergeant of Arms in the chamber. Everyone else was at their respective home or business, wherever they chose to tune in from. And it went, having only, particularly for the members who'd only seen it the night before, it went extremely well. We've had all positive comments back from them. We had one of the challenges, two challenges we had was being able to keep it being broadcast and then also keeping the Hansard tuned into it. So we actually tied it into the old system that we use for our Hansard and for the broadcasting, feeding it through our mics from Parliament, and the broadcast went fine over the airways. The Hansard people were able to do like they do normally. We're still looking at fine-tuning that a bit more as we go further along with the regular settings, whether we can actually tie them directly into the system or have to go back to what we done for the last setting and just tie them into the mic system. But the challenge was simply somebody taking ownership and saying, we're going to do it. And I saw that I needed to do it as a speaker. I'm going to take ownership, take full responsibility. If there were any hurdles that had to be jumped, I knocked them all down to say that we're going to make it happen. I'll get it done, and then what was the correct or better way than me just being a bulldog and steamrolling over it. But I recognize that for me, it was, we're asked the country to live under certain measures. We as a leadership need to set the example and do the same thing. And that was bottom line for me. Bottom line said it all. And
thank you so much, Speaker Lister.
One is for the, because I know when you talk, one other point, if you don't mind, when there was the presentations were done by the presenters, they spoke about the voting. What I liked about the system that we used, it allowed the voting to be done somewhat to almost like we do in the House, because most of the times in the House, let's be realistic, it's just a loud vote who has, whether the nays or the yeas outvote the other side. And if there is a division, the division is taken by name. Same thing that when it was done here. I explained it in the training session that on a normal vote, I'm going to do the same thing. They can poll in. There's a polling system under the WebEx where you can put the question and they can respond to it. And the results I get immediately, then I showed the count result back to all the members. Now, had a member wanted to call for a division, it would be the same thing in the House. I just needed 3 members to indicate that they wanted a division, and we would have gone to a name call and we recorded it by name call. But other than that, it was just a regular vote by who had the largest support, yay or nay.
All righty, I want to thank you again, Speaker Lister. We're going to move on to the Member of Parliament from Canada, Mark Sayre. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but please forgive me if I'm not. So if the Member of Parliament for Canada is present with us, we'd like to invite you to share your experience or
Thank
question.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's Mark Sayre, the French accent, but that's okay. The accent aigu wasn't there. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for participating today. I'd like to thank ParlAmericas International and the Commonwealth International for putting this together, obviously, and the 3 panelists were wonderful in the presentation. I'll just be brief here about some of the activities here we've done in Canada. On March 13th, both the House of Commons and the Senate adjourned. And in the Senate has been recalled 3 times with a small quorum of senators to pass 3 bills that the House of Commons had passed. Also, the Senate has set up 3 virtual committees, and all remotely, either teleconferencing or video conferencing. Obviously, same as the House of Commons has been recalled 3 times to look at individual support bills for individuals, for businesses, and for student aid. And there's been a quorum of about 30 MPs attending out of the 338. So a lot of similarities with the UK. We also have in the House of Commons set up 6 committees. And one of the committees is working with the PROC, the Procedures and House Affairs, is working closely with the House of Commons administration, and we have Jeffrey Leblanc here, the part of the session today, that are studying and reporting back to the House of Commons by May 15th on ensuring how can we get all of the members of Parliament to participate in the question period, or there's a lot of activities, and as a parliamentarian, I want to make sure that my rights are that I could participate, not just having a small numbers and not just having MPs that are close to the capital, close to Parliament participating, how can we ensure working together to ensure that all members of Parliament are able to proceed. In Canada, we've done the House of Commons Special Committee has been in person, again, a special 3 times a week, and that with just a quorum of about 30 MPs that are asking questions to cabinet ministers. So this is important for the opposition, obviously, to continue the democratic right of the opposition to be asking questions and pushing the government to change some of the legislation. We've also done, and we've done a test run and one virtual House sitting. It's a committee of the whole, so it's not the entire Parliament, but it's the committee of the whole. And we had our first virtual sitting this week, actually, with 300 MPs, close to 300 MPs attending via Zoom. The House of Commons, the staff had set it up in their own domain for security, but it was also available as a committee of the whole to the public. So all these meetings have closed captioning in French and English. And my observations on the first virtual House sitting with the 300 MPs, the headsets are very, very important to have, especially for translation. There's a lot of audio challenges, and sometimes the interpreter couldn't hear. So the headsets were really important. Obviously, as mentioned today, some of the internet challenges in some of the remote areas have been something that we have to look at with the bandwidth. And also on the translation side with the microphone, with the floor microphone switching over to the English or to the French, there was some misinterpretation. So we want to make sure that that process is worked out, and I'm confident for the next setting it'll be worked out. So a lot of this information that's provided today and that we did this week will provide the House of Commons administration and PROC with some recommendations back on May 15th. So my question, I mean, it was a bit answered. Love the presentation of the panelists, but the key here is how do we, as legislators, ensuring during this pandemic and looking at the future, that all parliamentarians, all legislators are able to participate in the democratic rights. So the question basically here is how do we continue this sharing of experiences that we've had, and like, for example, in my case, obviously with Canada and similarities with the UK, just wanted to ask, when you're looking at some of the video conferencing, teleconferencing platforms, what did you look at for evaluating either Zoom, Microsoft? We talked about Cisco. How do we look at evaluating some of those platforms, and also how do we make modifications? Have you made modifications, and how is it going to look at making modifications on the standing orders, which are important to make sure that we have a holistic approach here to all members of Parliament and senators to participate in moving forward. So it's a challenge that we have to do, but I just want to make sure that we push to make sure that all members and we continue to have these types of information sharing between the associations is really, really good. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What I'm going to suggest, folks, is that in the interim, when a question is posed, panelists or other members, if you can utilize the chat to respond so that we can move on to the next country to allow everybody an opportunity to chime in. So in the interim, please, if you have a look in the chat section, if you click more to the top right corner of your screen, you should see more with 3 dots, and you can chat with everyone or an individual that you'd like to clarify something with. We now move on to the Cayman Islands. Speaker Bush is here with us today as well. Speaker Bush, if you're ready, we'd like to invite you to chime in with your experience or question.
Can you hear us now, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we can hear you, Speaker Bush. We can hear you.
Well,
Floor is yours.
I don't know if you can see me or not, but if you can hear me, that's good. Colleagues, it is good to know all of you are safe to thank the presenters for their valuable input. We here in the Cayman are staying locked down. Our motto says that he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. And we all know that the seas, for all of us, can be most boisterous, to say the least at times, and floods will destroy. So I am thankful to God for his mercies to us in the past and thus far, Mr. Chairman, and we continue to pray for all of us in the region and beyond. We have had a meeting of the Assembly and amended our standing orders to allow virtual meetings. And so we have had one meeting of the House, and that has gone well. My concern is whether the move towards fully virtual meetings of Parliament could potentially render the use of the mace redundant. And that is a question that I would like to pose, and hopefully someone can shed some light on it. This whole pandemic is like nothing that I've seen in my 36 years of being elected to the legislature, but I am confident that we are all strong enough, and if we follow instructions, we will make it. We pray for those who have to lead in the front at all times. So hopefully someone could answer or say something in regards to the use of the mace in these virtual meetings. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Speaker Bush. And again, I just invite everybody to chime in via the chat in the interim. And if we have time, we'll come back and allow people to voice their input. We're now going to move on to Dominica. We have the Speaker of the House of Assembly, Joseph Isaac, with us today. Speaker Isaac, if you are here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay?
Yes,
welcome.
I'm here. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Very informative and very fruitful and practical presentations earlier. In Dominica, I am not going to be long. We had a meeting on the 6th of April in which we actually developed some guidelines. So all members could adhere to the guidelines, but we used the basis of the WHO and PAU guideline, in which we talk about social distancing. We measure Parliament in terms of actual measurement to ensure that people will 6 feet minimum away from each other. So in actual delivery in the debate, we ensure that on the opposition side, we had a maximum number of people on the opposition side with mics and with desk and everything. On the government side, we to maintain the same percentage in regards to percentage of electoral results and to ensure that everybody had that equal opportunity. We also, in the standing order, there is the term called strangers. So we did not invite strangers except for about 2 or 3 members of the media. We are the sergeants of arms. These were who we really invited as strangers. We did not invite permanent secretaries and financial secretaries and all that. We told them that they could be on standby in regards to if ministers wanted information or there was some query. We also indicated to them that they could be in the vehicle also, in the AC, so again to maintain social distancing. The session was very, very, very smooth. It ran smoothly with not any major challenges or problems. Again, following the same guideline, people who went in or out of Parliament had to have face masks in their presentation, even when they were leaving and entering, and they would use sanitizer. We'd have people stationed there to ensure all that was done. We are currently contemplating using the social media platform, most likely Zoom. But under our constitution, the constitution clearly says that yes, we can have Parliament will meet, but it does not say specifically where. And we at the last meeting of Parliament we had, we gave directive, that Parliament gave directive to the Attorney General to give a legal opinion. In his legal opinion, he indicated that under the actual constitution, that we have limitations in regards to hosting a session of Parliament. However, within the standing orders, there is a standing order 86. In that standing order, it gives the Speaker authority to actually regulate the conduct and business of Parliament. I'll just read just one little section there. Standing Order 86 says that 1, subject to the provisions of Standing Order 87.1, rules in cases not provided for by the standing orders, the Speaker shall have power to regulate the conduct of the business in all matters not provided for in these standing orders. So I'm saying that so my colleagues can, if your standing orders give the Speaker that authority, you can lean on that there to make the decision to keep the virtual meeting. It also says in 86.2 that the Speaker shall be responsible for the management and general administration of the House. 3, that is the last one, that is 86.3 says, a decision by the Speaker, whether relating to these standing orders or to a matter for which these standing orders do not provide, shall not be challenged, save upon a substantive motion moved for that exclusive purpose. So really and truly, if your standing order has that, that is the route we can really use, I figure, within the OECS region, because the Constitution precludes us from that taking that direction in regards to a virtual session. But in essence, I think we also have the major challenge in Dominica in regards to the economic and social challenge that people are, concerned, and people want certain relief. And they are also asking for parliamentarians and ministers, especially in the executive branch, to take a pay cut. But all in all, I think we are moving on in Dominica, and I really welcome this session here today. So thank you everyone who have presented, and for the other colleagues who have at least articulated and bringing some key points there. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to find myself discussing with you guys today.
Speaker Isaac, thank you so much. You were extremely helpful just now. We're going to move on now to St. Kitts and Nevis, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Akila Byron Nesbitt. It is a pleasure to see you again. I send regards from our friend Jamaica. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much to ParlAmericas, first of all, for allowing us to be able to have this very informative session. It is always good to be able to share experiences and for us to be able to learn from others as well. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have not moved to the virtual platform. What we have been doing though is our parliament has been reconfigured to allow us to be able to meet in the chambers, but applying social distancing. So we have already made that change. The last time we met would have been for our state of emergency, to do a resolution for a state of emergency. And we were able to accomplish the arrangements within the chambers to be able to practice social distancing. I know, just like all the other Caribbean islands, that our standing order would not allow us to be able to meet virtually. And fortunately for us, we would have already put a committee together to review our standing orders, which everyone knows, most of us in the region as well, our standing orders, to say it nicely, is archaic and needed some review. And so now this gives us the opportunity to put that forward and on the front burners to ensure that we make the necessary changes, because those changes would not just affect us virtually, but there are also some other changes that are necessary to ensure that we move those standing orders into the new century that we are living in, and ensure that whatever changes that are necessary and things that come up, this just being one of them, we don't know what else the future would hold, we would be able to do what we need to do to ensure that we're able to meet our orders, our standing orders, and we won't be at a position where we're saying that we don't have the legislation or the standing orders to back whatever it is that we need to move forward to. So in St. Kitts and Nevis, yes, what we have been doing is meeting in Parliament still. We have been practicing social distancing, and of course we will ensure that we have our standing orders reviewed so that we can be able to meet whatever changes would be necessary. I was happy to hear the Isle of Man say that they have been using Microsoft Teams. I know within government itself, we have just moved towards having our schools on Teams so that the different education, the different schools are now using Teams as a means of virtual classrooms, and so it will be interesting to see how that goes, and maybe we can consider that for ourselves as well. I know Teams only allow a few persons to be on screen at one time, but I don't see that as a huge challenge, as there should really only be one speaker at a time in any event. So hopefully we would be able to have the changes necessary in order for us to be able to move forward with our virtual platform if it do becomes necessary. But as I said, the standing orders as a whole are being reviewed, and so this change would more than likely be added as well. So once again, thank you to ParlAmericas and to everyone who presented. The information was useful and would allow us to be able to adopt some areas necessary to ensure that our Parliament too is able to move forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We'll now move on to our colleague in St. Lucia, Speaker Danielle. Speaker Danielle, if you are ready, you can just share with us your experience or pose your questions.
Thank you very much. If everyone is hearing, I hope everyone is hearing me. In St. Lucia, we've been meeting. In fact, last night was our last session. We've met over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times since the pandemic has started. We've declared a state of emergency. We've met to extend that state of emergency to the end of this month, May. We've met. The question of social distancing, we practice that fully in the Parliament. When we met for the extension of the state of emergency, we limited numbers to just the quorum. We rotated members so that all members had an opportunity to speak. We didn't deny anybody that right that they have to speak in the Parliament of St. Lucia. Around Parliament, we have hand sanitizers, we have wipes, Clorox, everything is provided to members fully so that they could ensure that they practice the protocols as stipulated by the Ministry of Health. Masks had to be worn throughout the session. The only time some members had difficulty speaking with the mask on, so some leeway were given to them so that they may be able to remove the mask if they were not comfortable speaking with the mask. In terms of virtual Parliament, our Constitution states that each session of Parliament, that's section 54, each session of Parliament shall be held at such place within St. Lucia. Subsection 2 goes on to say, subject to provision of subsection 1, the sitting of the Senate or the House shall be held at such time and place as it may by the rules of procedure of the Parliament. So the Parliament can amend its own rules and procedure to determine where it meets and how it meets. In my thinking, Dominica mentioned the other provisions. We have similar provisions in our Constitution But I believe that may be dealing just with in terms of internal procedures and the conduct of the business of Parliament itself, but not where Parliament meets. But that's up for us to decide and to get the legal opinion on that. But my opinion is that I believe that our standing orders would have to be amended to allow for virtual sitting of Parliament. We just completed our debate on the estimates. For the last 3 days, we've been doing that, again, practicing social distancing, the wearing of masks, and following all protocols so established. During the state of emergency, Parliament is declared an essential service. So we have to be meeting. Our staff have to be at work, even though for limited hours, but our staff must be at work. And that is what we've been doing over the last few weeks. Once again, thank you, ParlAmericas. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to participate in this and making a contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Speaker Daniel. We will now move on to Suriname, where we have the Speaker of the National Assembly, Jennifer Simmons. Speaker Simmons, if you are ready, we would like to invite you to share the experience in Suriname or pose your questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see all of you, be it through some form of distance communication. We have a special situation in Suriname, and it is that we actually have elections on the 25th of May. We have a specific situation, some kind like a state of emergency. So we have been with the recess from the beginning of April, actually. Due to COVID-19, we have not been able to have the recess fully as we used to. So we have had certain meetings. And what we're doing is that we have our meetings in a way that we keep the distance. We have actually broadened the room so that members can sit on every other chair or be somewhere else in the building. That's what we have done. Our standing orders don't allow us to have fully meetings, virtual meetings. We have looked at it, and what we have done is that when preparing some pieces of legislation, the last pieces of legislation, we have worked with our online office of IBM Connections to prepare everything, almost totally, to see if we agree on the legislation. And then we have worked with all the party group leaders to next week, maybe we will come and have only a very short meeting in person and vote on the legislation. So we have our normal ICT online meeting rooms for committees and for the whole parliament, and we've worked with that. But meetings like what we are doing now with Zoom will not be applicable here because of our standing orders. So we will have to change those if we want to do that. I had a question, I don't know if it already has been mentioned by people from Suriname, but how do we make sure that the meetings we would have or would like to have, like this one, are could be followed by the population, the citizens? Are they able to see it, or do you stream it afterwards if you have a meeting like this one? Because we have the TV, and the citizens can follow everything that's happening in the parliament. We also stream through YouTube. So I was wondering if there are any programs. I've seen a list, some 4 or 5 programs mentioned, platforms mentioned, but do they allow the population to follow these discussions live if you have them like this? Or should we focus on streaming or video afterwards? This is my contribution. I think that we have a very specific situation in Suriname now, moving on, trying to hold the elections on the 25th of May and keeping the distance and doing everything. This was the meeting I was in, why I left this meeting for some time. So I don't know if other countries at this moment will have elections in this during this COVID period, but this is an extra challenge for us. And on the other hand, it is less busy in Parliament at the moment. This is my contribution and my question about how do the population, do we make sure that the population can follow the discussions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Speaker Simmons. I will just remind everybody to use the chat. I know Speaker Watterson's already commented to Speaker Simmons just now via the chat. So again, everybody, if you posed a question or you'd like to ask or answer, please use the chat in the interim, just for the interest of time. We will now move on to the speaker from Trinidad and Tobago, Speaker Bridget Anisette George. If you are ready, we'd like to invite you to share the experience in Trinidad or pose your questions as well.
Thank
Speaker
you, Chairman.
Simmons.
In the interest of time, I would just give our experience. I have been using the chat and seeing the questions I would have liked to pose being answered. The Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago has tackled its survival and sustainability in a two-pronged way. Endorsing your initial comments, yes, we accept that we are essential. And in the public health orders, which were instituted by our Minister of Health, Parliament was identified as one of the essential services. In keeping ourselves alive in the crisis, as Louis spoke of, we have done all that is necessary for virtual sittings, even though we've not had any. We've identified that we would need to do an amendment to our standing orders. That amendment has been drafted. There's a process. It has to go to our standing orders committee, and then they would make the recommendation to the Parliament, and the Parliament will pass a resolution. Also, in terms of, like I think Barbados had identified, there's a requirement that Her Excellency the President of the Republic will make a proclamation saying where the sittings of Parliament will take place. And like Barbados, we recently moved, which was in January, back to our original moorings, the Red House. And therefore, there was a proclamation by Her Excellency for the Red House to be the place for the sittings. And therefore, once the resolution is passed by the House, then we would invite Her Excellency to make a proclamation to allow for virtual sittings. But in the meantime, we have continued to have sittings. We've had sittings at the House twice this week, on Monday and Wednesday. And as we speak, there is a sitting of the Senate, which has begun since 10 a.m. our time. Luckily, and very fortuitously, coming back to the Red House allowed us a certain amount of space. Our staff has been put on work from home, and there's a rotation of staff, which has freed up a lot of space. So we have allowed for, in our sittings, all our parliamentarians who wish to come can come. They are spread out through our parliamentary complex, so that we have, in terms of the actual chamber, put in place a restriction for the numbers of persons allowed into the chambers. So no members of the public, 5 media, to allow for the quorum there, which is our quorum is 12, but we've allowed for 8 government members, 6 opposition members, keeping the balance, and also for 1 member of our CPC, which is our legislative drafting entity of the government, and for a reduced number of parliamentary staff at the table, and also, of course, for the presence of the marshal and the security, the police. Other than that, what we've done is we've suspended the standing order with respect to speaking time and put in place a time limit for speaking throughout the time, the duration of the crisis. So what obtains is that the mover of any motion or any bill will speak for 30 minutes. The first responder will speak for 30 minutes and everybody thereafter will speak for 20 minutes. Our parliamentarians have agreed to do away with the 30-minute suspension for tea, and therefore they filter out for tea as they wish. We've put in a provision or mechanism, I should say, for in the event there's a division. Our parliamentarians are spread throughout the parliamentary complex, again, maintaining social distancing. But what we would have provided is that if a division is called, a public announcement will be made in the building. Our whips will notify their members electronically, but our attendants and our marshal and deputy marshal will go also to ensure that members come into the chamber. They are allowed 3 minutes to enter the chamber before the vote starts. But any member who comes in before the vote is announced will be allowed to vote. And we did that Monday at our sitting in the House, and it moved very smoothly. So we will continue like that if needs be until we decide to go virtually. On the technical side, everything has been tested for a virtual sitting. And in fact, we are 85% ready. And even we can broadcast the virtual sitting. We both on our social platforms and on our dedicated radio and television channels. What my clerks tell me is that if it were total virtual sitting, we are ready. If it's a hybrid, as in the House of Commons, we have a bit of a technical challenge, even though we think we found the solution to that. So I think that is our experience. We've done like the other parliaments as reported in terms of all the health and safety measures have been put in place. And in fact, as of Monday, all our parliamentarians are subjected to thermal screening on entry into the complex. They all are required to wear masks in the chamber. And I have ordered that the masks be black masks so that we don't get all kinds of statements being made subliminally from masks. And we provided each of our members with a free reusable cloth mask. Some members may be uncomfortable with speaking in a mask, so what we've done is we have provided both for the opposition and for the government a separate space where members who are not comfortable speaking from their space with the mask will go to and speak without the mask. And these spaces are sanitized before and after every member speaks. So we've continued to sit. Hopefully our committees have been suspended, but we are going to try with a virtual sitting of one of our committees within the next week or two. So that's how we've survived and have maintained doing our business. And in fact, in our sittings and the sitting that is currently on is not a COVID-related matter. It is a measure that our Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, which is a matter that was being dealt with the Senate even before COVID reached our shores. So we continue with business as usual, but with social distancing and all the necessary health and safety measures and restrictions. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much. Very helpful and informative. We now move on to the Turks and Caicos. We have the Clerk of the House of Assembly, Tracy Parker, and the Speaker, Dwayne Taylor. I believe Speaker Taylor is going to make the intervention. If not, then we'll hear from the clerk. Since we don't have Turks and Caicos, I can move over to Speaker Watson.
Thank you. Just to pick on a few of the points that were raised, Speaker Lister raised the point about quorum. One of the things we were worried about was when we started getting members saying, I'm staying home, I'm going to self-isolate due to health conditions or age, whatever it might be, and then we could see the numbers attending dropping off. What was interesting was there was far more appetite for a virtual sitting, whatever that might be, than there was to lower the quorum. And I think that's something that's echoed around the ParlAmericas framework as well. In terms of divisions, again, just to compare our experience to that of Bermuda, we finish each motion and so the presiding officer will put the question and then say, I presume that the motion is carried unless any member indicates dissent, which they would do in the chat box. If there is dissent, we have a vote, but if not, the motion therefore just carries. Interesting points from Mark in Canada, especially around participation. And to also pick up on the point that Speaker Anisette Jones made about participation, the hybrid model is the worst of all worlds. At least members know that there's a level playing field with everybody being at home. When there are some people in the chamber and some people at home, I think there's the feeling that some people are better connected, better able to communicate. And certainly maybe that's just a product of our system where in the Isle of Man, we don't have political parties. So we're all independents and that perhaps it makes that feeling more acute. I can't help but make the point that between regular chambers, chamber renovations, and virtual chambers, Canada must have the record for the most number of chambers of any country anywhere in the world for any parliament. I think you must have 5 now if you count the virtual one. And the decision to use Microsoft Teams was very much around security reasons, as others have reflected on. Those were just points that I thought I could just pick up on, perhaps easier in debate than I could in the chat box. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you so much, Speaker Watterson. I understand we have the speaker from St. Vincent and the Grenadines back with us. Speaker James, if you're here, could you indicate so that we can have you share your experience or pose your questions?
All right, thank you very much, Chair. Let me say good morning to everyone, or afternoon to everyone who's joining us with the proceedings today. St. Vincent, we have had a few measures we have implemented in our Parliament, whereby we have limited access to the public, the general public, to our Strangers Gallery in St. Vincent. We have took the opportunity to increase the space between members, physical and social distancing guidelines that we're following to ensure that members of the Parliament are not sitting too close to each other. And we have continued to have our sittings directly in the Parliament building. I'm very happy for this intervention because we're now in a position to look at other countries and the models and formulas that they're using for virtual sittings. And no doubt in St. Vincent would be hoping to put together a framework for implementation in the event that we have to live with the long-standing challenges of COVID and other pandemics in the near future. There were a few questions that I had raised. Some were answered in the chat in relation to the viewing of the general public. When you're having virtual sittings, how is that the public able to see the viewings? But I recognize that some persons are able to have a link directly to whether it's online or via national television. Interestingly, in the Westminster model, we know the practice of using the mace. And when we said about implementing a virtual sitting, how does one take into consideration the absence of the mace whether it's the standing orders will be amended to facilitate these Syrian challenges that we'll see where we're not meeting physically are some of the questions that we'll have to obviously answer here and around the parliaments of the Caribbean. In St. Vincent, we have suspended our parliament. We have adjourned. We have not yet had a next date for sitting, but I can imagine we will be looking to tighten some of the measures for future sittings, whether they're in the immediate future or in the long term. So this is a very helpful forum, and we can adapt and we can implement some of the recommendations that I see coming through here in relation to St. Vincent. I know we're pressed for time, so I don't want to continue with our experiences, but we're looking forward to listening and hearing more persons.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And finally, we'd like to invite Mr. Hamlin to share his wrap up before we move into the evaluation and the official closing from Speaker Aniset George. Mr. Hamlin, if you're ready.
Thank you very much. There have been a lot of really interesting questions on the sidebar, and I've tried to answer some of those. I should say that obviously we are continuing to develop very fast. We may have electronic voting by this time next week in the House of Commons, which will be an astonishingly rapid change. We've never had it before. I note the point that made by a previous speaker that the hybrid model is the worst of all worlds. That's not been our experience to date. I noticed that Mark Bosk, the former clerk of the Canadian House of Commons, has suggested that that might be a model for the future, thinking about the next 6, 12, 18 months, thinking about our two houses. In the House of Lords, it has a demographic who are largely elderly and will wish to stay away and work entirely virtually if they can. The House of Commons, a different demographic. Maybe as more people start coming back to work more generally, there will be an interest in more physical presence, but a lot of members will still want to participate virtually. So having a model which we know works now with a very small physical representation and a very large virtual presentation has the advantage that it might be useful in the longer term. So I leave that thought as we're looking to the future, which is very uncertain. We hope it all gets better. But it's really important to think, even now, what are we learning? What have we changed that we might want to keep in the longer term? And certainly from the point of view of accessibility for members and witnesses before committees, being able to have really good video conferencing is already making a huge difference. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamlin. Colleagues, first of all, let me just thank the organizers for putting this together today. I note right now we have some 53 participants. We've obviously lost a couple of people in the last few minutes, but to each of you that took the time to chime in, share your experience and pose questions that so many of us were concerned about, I give you my thanks personally, and the thanks of the Bahamas that we have learned a lot today. And I would also like to remind you of the fact that there are so many takeaways from this today. Firstly, Brazil shared Cisco, the Isle of Man, the Microsoft Teams. We're obviously using Zoom. Bermuda indicated there's WebEx. There's so many ways we can look at moving to some of our meetings being virtually. But as I began this session, I would say again, in each of our countries, we've identified so many essential services. And I want to say to you again that the legislative branch is an essential service. It must continue. We can deal with a health and economic crisis simultaneously. And with the absence of our presence in Parliament, I fear that we may end up with a democratic crisis. So I think we need to remind ourselves and our people that Parliament is essential and that we need to get back to work. And we, all of us in the various countries we're in, we adapt to change. Finally, may I just remind all of you that are still meeting that there is a fear that if one parliamentarian is infected, that everyone exposed who attended Parliament can also be infected, thus have to be quarantined, or worse, likely to be infected as well. So please bear that in mind. In the interim, Before we go to Speaker Bridget Annison George from Trinidad, there is a 2-minute evaluation should be coming up on your screen very shortly. I'm going to ask each of you to please just take 2 minutes to complete the evaluation for us on this meeting. That should be coming up on your screen momentarily. And after that, all right, colleagues, thank you again. I would like to invite Speaker of the House of Representatives from Trinidad and Tobago, Bridget Annison George, to come and give us the official wrap up and closing.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And it's afternoon for me, but I think for anyone joining us from Belize, it may be still good morning, good afternoon, and for our colleague in the UK, and maybe Speaker Watterson, is most probably good evening for you. I want to say that this has been an extremely exhilarating experience. On behalf of the President of ParlAmericas, Elizabeth Cabezas, the member of the National Assembly of Ecuador, may I express her warm wishes and best regards to all the parliamentarians, all the parliaments, all the parliamentary staff who've been with us this morning in this meeting in our collective and individual fight against the scourge of COVID-19. In closing this online session, firstly, may I thank our panelists, Speaker Watterson, and our expert panelist, Mr. Hamlin from the House of Commons, and Senor Bandeira de Milho from the Senate of Brazil, each of whom have provided a great dialogue on the current issues facing our respective legislatures. But personally, I would say for me, I have found this webinar to be extremely useful in learning from the diversity of experiences, from the Senate of Brazil to the Parliament of the Isles of Man, regardless of the size of our respective legislatures or the numbers of our constituents that we represent. We as public servants have in common our desire to meet the needs of our fellow citizens at this difficult time. There can be no value that can be put on the willing sharing of one's knowledge and experience, and I thank you all. On behalf of the legislatures which have participated, may I express our gratitude to both ParlAmericas and the CPA for promoting and facilitating this webinar. Permit me to laud this as an historic event. Historic not merely because we have conducted a successful online meeting. Those of us who are members of ParlAmericas look forward to the quarterly gatherings of one or the other of our networks in a host jurisdiction. So that this is really novel. In fact, Alicia had said it earlier. We should have met in, I think it would have been March, in, I think it would have been, Alicia, remind me.
Brazil.
In Brazil.
Brasilia.
That's so. Okay, but I think in the last month or so, I think we've come to realize that online meetings have become the norm. And I think they really will qualify for one of the new normals. Specific to us though, this meeting is historic because despite the separation required by social distancing and inflicted by travel restrictions, we as legislators and parliamentary staff have demolished distances of geography and organizational structures to gather and discuss matters for our mutual benefit and our sustainability. To my knowledge, this is the first collaboration of ParlAmericas and CPE. And this collaboration was not limited to the English-speaking parliaments of ParlAmericas, but has been expanded to its reach to include all members of the Caribbean, America, and Atlantic region of CPE, Suriname, and Haiti. To ParlAmericas and CPA, I thank you for providing this historic platform. To all participants and observers, without your involvement, this historic event could not have occurred, and our discussions were all the richer for your participation. On a personal note, I am humbled to have been invited by ParlAmericas and CPA to deliver these closing remarks. As a member of the board of ParlAmericas and also as a member of the International Executive Committee of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, I value both of these institutions highly, particularly in these difficult times, for their commitment to the promotion of democracy and good governance throughout their respective memberships. At this time, the urgency of the response to the pandemic, in the view of some, has become the cause of, or the guise for, or the justification for the power of the executive being exercised so as to distance governments from parliamentary oversight in many jurisdictions. Whether or not we accept that view, the work of networks like ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network is crucial, in fact, critical in times of crises to ensure that parliaments remain alive and functional for governments to maintain transparent practices and procedures. In fact, Louise said it another way, that in times of crisis, parliaments must function. Providing access to public information, promoting the participation of citizens in legislative decision-making, and ensuring a culture of ethical and accountable behavior activities that must be considered at the forefront of our efforts to maintain the function of Parliament during this crisis and any other crisis that may occur. In this meeting, many parliamentarians and parliamentary staff have shared actions taken by their respective legislatures in response to this crisis. And while I commend all our sharing and our willingness to, expose our experience, speak to our challenges and so on, I want to underscore the statement made by, I think, each of our panelists, in that none of these are prescriptions. There are lessons to learn. And I say that in terms of, the discussion about, oh God, to be very Trinidadian, we don't have the resources. Where do the resources come from? And what I want to say to us is that necessity is the mother of invention. With the little we all have, all our parliamentarians, I will take the liberty to say, have devices, whether they were devices provided by their parliaments or whether they're personal devices. I think as Mr. Hamlin, or certainly one of the panelists said, that we have to be realistic, okay, in terms of what we have, what our current limitations are. Of course, we are not at all completely constrained by our current limitations. We use what we have, we create with what we have. But for the long term, we set out a roadmap with respect to how do we get there. And I say that also in terms of the plug for collaboration, okay? We can't wait on others to do it for ourselves. We are all a phone call away, an email away, a webinar away. Our various associations allow us to talk. We all know each other. And I must say to Speaker Isaac, thank you for getting to know you, even if through this, but I think the warmth that we all share is sufficient for us to continue the collaboration individually and collectively. And I am sure, like my parliament, many of us, as we've seen here, are currently considering what our next steps are in response to the pandemic. How do we discharge our duty to our citizens? That is to say, keeping our executive open, transparent, and accountable, while safeguarding the safety, the livelihood, health, and well-being of our citizens in general, and our staff, and ourselves in particular. Taking the liberty on our behalf, I dare say that this webinar was helpful, informative, and of course, we are social beings, even with the social distancing, and we couldn't meet each other in a normal forum and hug and kiss and shake, and we may never be able to do that for a long time to come. I think the warmth through the technology and the well-being and the goodwill was felt by each of us as participants. And therefore, I know that what we shared will guide our continuing deliberations in our own parliaments and our discussions. In conclusion, I want to point participants to the wealth of resources that have been provided by CPA and by ParlAmericas, which can be found on their website. I think Jarvis spoke in his opening to by CPA, and Alicia also spoke to what has been provided by ParlAmericas. And I know it has reached me personally, and I'm sure for all of you all, it has reached you all by the communications they have sent. I also want to say, in terms of our request for continued collaborations and webinars, ParlAmericas will also be hosting a global webinar with the Open Parliament e-network next Friday on the importance of parliamentary openness as we move forward towards virtual sittings. CPA also has published a toolkit on practical measures for parliamentarians and parliamentary staff. And CPA will also be hosting 2 virtual briefing webinars for Commonwealth clerks and parliamentary staff next Tuesday and next Wednesday. Information on all of these resources and activities can be found on CPA and ParlAmericas websites and social media, and will be distributed to all participants by email later today. In fact, I think the chat had been showing some of the links to the publications and to the upcoming seminars and the toolkit. So I want to thank you all. I know we went much longer, but I think the fact that we all stayed shows our interest and our enthusiasm. Alicia, thank you very much. To the staff of ParlAmericas, thank you very much. Jarvis, thank you very much. Pleasant evening to each of you. Thank you.